This is the story of Inanna and Ereshkigal. Inanna's Descent into the Underworld is its official title. I've been dreaming of telling this story on a recording for a while now. I tell it a lot in sessions and women's circles. It's one of my favorites to share with women as well as men because it exemplifies a universal human quality of going into the depths of the underworld. And this isn't a journey that is for everyone. In a lot of cultures, only the shamans take this journey. Only the really wise and initiated beings go on a journey into the underworld. It is intense and scary and requires a death of sorts that a lot of people wouldn't want to encounter. But as we'll see through this story of Inanna's descent into the underworld, when you take that descent, you gain a wisdom, a knowledge of life and death that sticks with you always. There's many metaphors that can be drawn from this story, and we'll discuss some of those as we go along as well as at the end. But I think for each person there's a really unique and powerful message that is just for you. That's something that you will find and take away that nobody else will see. So that's why I'm excited to deliver this story verbally from what has resonated and stuck with me. I'd only heard it once, and it just stuck with me so deeply that I kept repeating it and telling it. And I've been meaning to get this book to dive deeper into the story for a long time, but I just kept retelling it through my words, and I was actually surprised to get the book and realize that I have still been telling the story true to its original written form. This is the first written account of the goddess that we have, the first goddess story that we have written down. For many cultures, it was a verbal tradition, and receiving stories from elders and passing them down through the tribe and through the tribes people was the way that these mythic archetypal stories got shared. So yeah, there's something that sticks with this one for me, and I'm honored to share it with you. So it begins with Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth. She is a beautiful, wise, powerful, compassionate goddess of life. She's the goddess of heaven and earth. She's fertile, she's shining. She starts as a sky goddess, and then she comes to the earth and she marries Damuzi, who is a shepherd, turned kind of a farmer as well. And so he's a god of the earth, and she's a goddess of heaven. And so they meet and become goddess of heaven and earth, and he gets to rise up to a celestial heavenly throne as well as the earthly plane that he's ruled over. So it starts with Inanna. The first line, it says, "From the great above, Inanna turned her ear to the great below." So there's a calling from the underworld. Her sister Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld, the queen of death. And so there's this juxtaposition between Inanna, the beautiful, shining, loved, worshipped, like held on high by the humans, wise, powerful, the goddess of heaven, and then Ereshkigal, who's the goddess of death, who people dread. They don't want to see her. They don't want to think about her. There's not many hymns to Ereshkigal. She's kind of forgotten and cast out. And already you can see this juxtaposition between the the parts of ourselves that we love and celebrate and are proud of, and the parts of ourselves that are buried and cast out and hidden and in the shadows with the other dead and destroyed and forgotten things of our life. So Inanna gets this call to go into the underworld, and she takes her time visiting all 7 of her temples on earth and saying goodbye, kind of closing down her presence on earth. One by one, she dresses herself in 7 garments that represent her, the powers that have been bestowed on her by the god of wisdom, Enki, who has actually taken a similar journey into the underworld and risen back to heaven and is now proclaimed as this shaman who has a knowledge of all things, is what they say about Enki. He has a knowledge of all things. Because being a goddess of heaven, you have a knowledge of the heavenly works. Being a goddess of earth, you have a knowledge of the workings of earth. But you don't know the knowledge of the underworld yet. And so Inanna has this call to go into the underworld. And she, for her conscious knowledge, it is because Ereshkigal's husband, the bowl of heaven, has died. And so she wants to give her sympathies to Ereshkigal. And so she puts on her cloak, she puts on her breastplate, it's called Come Man Come. She puts on all these talismans of strength that represent her achievements and her powers in life. And she gets to the first gate and they say, Inanna, why have you come? And she says to give my regards to Ereshkigal. And the gatekeeper runs into the underworld and tells Ereshkigal that the goddess of heaven and earth is here. And this pisses Ereshkigal off because she's like, you have heaven, you have earth. Like, why are you coming down here? To Ereshkigal, Inanna is like kind of a slap in the face. If you are worshipped and praised and I am outcast, and I don't want to see you, especially in all your power and glory and accomplishment. And so Ereshkigal gives the messenger the direction to tell Inanna that she can enter the underworld, but she must take off her garments, her protections at each gate. She says, the goddess of heaven and earth will enter the underworld with her head bowed low. And we see this when we do shadow work, that we have to take off all these things of our identity that make us strong and powerful. We have to shed them until we're this like naked, powerless thing that we are deep down inside. As well as being eternally powerful inside, there's also this aspect of us that is powerless. And that is who Ereshkigal wants to meet. Not the Inanna that is in all her glory and power. She wants to meet the Ereshkigal that is broken and lost. Ereshkigal wants to meet the Inanna that is broken and lost, that mirrors Ereshkigal, the way Ereshkigal feels all the time. She wants Inanna to step down into that. So Inanna at each gate takes off a piece of herself and is sheds the layers and layers until she gets to the throne of Ereshkigal completely naked. And Ereshkigal sees her and has a trial of sorts. And Ereshkigal isn't fooled by the usual glowing thing that Inanna does. Ereshkigal sees where she's broken, sees where she's lied, where she's been false. And Ereshkigal says, you're not better than anyone else. I'm sentencing you to death. And Inanna gets sentenced to death and is hanging on the wall in the underworld. Inanna is sentenced to death and hanging on the wall in the underworld. In the poem, if you get this book and read the poem in her words, it's pretty short, and it's like this, and it comes with these pictures along the way. Yeah, and there's some really beautiful lines in here, and it repeats itself often, which is interesting. So even from this translation, a lot of the repetitions have been cut down because the actual recording of it has a lot of repetitions, which is interesting. And I'm just like looking at as she passes through each gate on her way down. She asks why, like, what is this? Why are you putting me through this? And she's told, quiet, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. And that for me kind of resembles like when we're going through a hard time and we're like, why? What's the point of this? What is this? And there's just kind of this answer of like, stop. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They should not be questioned. Even with all its pain and tragedy and unfairness, there's a perfection still to it. There's a reason for why we have to enter the underworld with our head bowed low. And it might not be a logical reason, but it's a divine reason. There's a divine reason for why we have to go through the hardships and the trials and the deaths that we go through in this life to become a more complete, more whole version of ourselves. So before Inanna descended into the underworld, she told Ninshabar, her kind of handmaiden, best friend, sidekick of sorts. She told Ninshabar, if I don't come back in 3 days, go and petition my 3 different fathers for me. And so she goes to her father's father, and she says, Ninshabar goes to her Inanna's father's father and says, Inanna hasn't come back in 3 days. Can you help her? And her father's father, her grandfather, says, Inanna knew what she was doing. Why did she go into the underworld? That's where people go to die. No, I can't help her. And then Ninshabar goes to her father and says, Inanna's gone. She's stuck in the underworld. Can you help her? And her father says, Inanna, why would Inanna go to the underworld? It's her problem, her situation she got herself into. I don't want anything to do with it. And for me, this represents the way that a lot of people don't understand when we go into these depths of ourselves. Many people don't comprehend why someone would go on an underworld journey. And even sometimes we don't understand why we would put ourselves through it, other than we've been called. And so Ninshabar goes to Enki, the god of wisdom, and he's the final god that Ninshabar petitions. And Enki understands. Enki himself has traveled into the underworld and risen. He knows this journey and why Inanna felt called to it. So he picks some dirt out of his fingernails and turns them into flies. And he tells the flies to go into the underworld, to sneak through the gates, and when he gets to Ereshkigal, to sympathize with her, to show her compassion and understanding. And she will be so touched by this that she'll offer you a gift. Don't accept anything other than Inanna's body. And this is the clever god of wisdom coming up with a solution, right? And so the little flies, they go into the underworld, and Ereshkigal, even though it was her idea to kill Inanna, it is still painful for her. In addition to all the other pain that is her life and being in the underworld, it's not easy to be Ereshkigal. It hurts. And she's mourning and she's saying, "Oh, my stomach." And the flies come and they go, "Oh, you poor thing, your stomach." She's going, "Oh, my heart." And they're going, "Oh, your heart. I'm so sorry." And she's going, "Oh, my insides." And they're like, "Oh no, your insides. You're so strong. How are you getting through this?" And just showing her support and sympathy. And she's kind of goes, "Hey, thank you. I'd like to give you a gift. Can I give you access to all of the beer and the distilleries and the bars of the earth?" And they say, "No, we don't want that." And she says, "What about food? Like endless supplies of food?" They say, "No, we don't want that." She says, "Well, then what can I give you to show my gratitude?" And they say, "We want that corpse of Inanna that's hanging on the wall." And Ereshkigal says, "Okay." And kind of concedes that, yes, she's lost this form to them. And they begin to take her out of the underworld. And before she leaves, there's this like wait. Nobody leaves the underworld. No one leaves the underworld, full stop. But because we're making an exception for you, Inanna, that you're getting to go out of the underworld, we're going to need somebody in your place. And she says, "Okay." Inanna comes back to life and ascends now back. It puts back on her cloak, puts back on her, like, takes back her possessions, but there's kind of still this like defeatedness to her because she's been in the underworld. And she comes out of the underworld and Ninshabar runs up to her and says, "Inanna, you're back." And the demons that have followed Inanna out of the underworld say, "Okay, we're taking Ninshabar in your place." And Inanna says, "No, not my faithful servant. I can't take Ninshabar." And they say, "Okay, walk on, Inanna, but somebody must be taken in your place." So Inanna keeps walking on the road, and her sons come, and they're dressed in their mourning clothes. They're mourning Inanna. They're dressed in sacks, and they're not in their normal, lively presentation. And the demons say, "Okay, we're taking them." And Inanna says, "No, not my sons. Look at my loyal sons. They've been mourning for me. They've been attending my temples. They've been looking after things without, no, not my sons." And the demons say, "Okay, Inanna, walk on, but we must have someone in your place." And finally, they get to the tree where Inanna's throne is, and her husband Damuzi is sitting there in his royal garments. He's ascended from the earth to the heavens, and he's didn't take the time to mourn her because he's just going about his kingly duties, he didn't take time to mourn her loss. And Inanna sees it and is enraged and says, "Take him," and sentences her husband to the underworld. And Damuzi begs with his brother-in-law, with Inanna's husband Utu, "Please transform me into," I think first it is a snake. There's a few, it's like a gazelle, a snake, and a bird. So he asks him to transform him into these different things to outrun the demons, and he's transforming and he's trying to outrun the demons. He doesn't want to get taken into the underworld. He's avoiding it, right? He's avoiding this underworld quest. And this part's interesting for me. It kind of shows the two different styles of entering the underworld. There's Inanna, who feels the call. She hears it. She settles her affairs. She goes about things. then she enters the gates. And then there's Damuzi, who's like outrunning it. I don't want to go, trying to get away, as these demons try to take him and pull him into the underworld to take Inanna's place. And finally, his sister and his best friend help him throughout this time, are helping him hide and escape, and he's like making his peace in his own way with life, right? And then the demons are looking for him. They go to his sister, and his sister's like, I'm not telling you where he is. They go to his friend, and his friend says, okay, I'll tell you where he is. And they find him. They find Damuzi, and they take him into the underworld. And now Inanna is struggling. She's been through this death, and now she's sentenced her beloved to the same one, because it frustrated her to see him living in this throne that she gave him, this ascension journey that he's taken, that she enabled, and while she was down, and now he's above her, and she doesn't like that, and so she sentences him into the underworld, and now she's having a hard time reclaiming that earthly throne. She's mourning what died within her in the underworld. She's mourning that this part of herself that was still kind of maybe maintaining this perception of everything's okay has also been sentenced to the underworld, and she's feeling sad and stuck, and Damuzi's sister is equally torn up about this and really hurting for the loss of her brother. And so Inanna is Damuzi's sister's name. Inanna and Inanna bump into each other on the street, and they're both mourning. But Inanna's kind of in this numb place where Inanna is impassioned, and she wants to do something, and she's trying to find a solution. And Inanna hears her and she's inspired by her sister's passion. And Inanna is saying, I'll take his place for half the year. And then we can switch. He can go to the underworld for half the year. I'll go to the underworld for the other half of the year. And Inanna was like, yes, this is the solution. And so this is the seasons. This is how the ancient Sumerians explained the seasons, and their rituals and ceremonies for the seasons were centered around this story. And so half the year, Damuzi would be at his ascended throne, and there would be fertility, and there would be crops growing, and there would be abundance in the land. And then half the year he would descend into the underworld, and things would stop growing. Life would kind of stall and cease and get cold. And then he would come back, and the cycle would resume again. So this is the story of the descent of Inanna. And I highly recommend this book. There's like a lot more wisdom in here. The end. Oh, this is how they found. I wanted to share this. This is how they found the texts written like this on these slabs of stone. And the story ends with Holy Ereshkigal, great is your renown. Holy Ereshkigal, I sing your praises. And I think that this is the song of any initiate who has gone on the underworld journey and risen again and knows this cycle, this medicine that we then hold of rebirth and courage and kind of this knowledge about the eternal light in our soul that can never die through every circumstance of life. when you've experienced this kind of death, this experience of the darkness of the underworld, and yet your soul has persevered, even if you return from it a little depressed, a little damaged, a little lost, there's still that truth that the eternal aspect of your soul is triumphant, and it always will be, no matter how many deaths and rebirths and deaths and rebirths we go through in life. There's always that eternal aspect of us that remains. So this is the story of Ereshkigal and Inanna. I like to call it that rather than just the descent of Inanna, because I like to give Ereshkigal her holy place as an equal to Inanna in this story. While Inanna is the hero that goes on the journey, Ereshkigal is witnessed here in a light that I think is a beautiful metaphor for working with our inner sadness, our inner anger, our shame, our guilt, the shadow aspects of ourself, to reclaim them and bring them to light, to face them, to sympathize with them and have compassion for them like the flies in the story. Thank you for listening.